It began on a calm afternoon in Saffron City, a day like any other, except fate had different plans. High above the city streets in the Sylph-Cumber skyscraper, an uneasy silence filled the corridors. Employees held their breath behind locked doors and overturned desks. In the boardroom on the top floor, Giovanni, the infamous leader of Team Rocket, stood with quiet confidence. His sharp suit was unruffled, posture relaxed, as if he were merely a businessman closing a routine deal. On the polished meeting table lay the prize that had drawn him here, a single purple-topped master ball, gleaming under fluorescent lights. This prototype Pokeball was capable of capturing any Pokémon without fail. In the normal course of history, a brave young trainer would have intervened to keep it out of evil's grasp, but in this timeline, that trainer arrived too late. There would be no heroic rescue at Sylph Co today. Giovanni's gloved hand closed around the Master Ball. The Sylph Company president, trembling and defeated, could only watch as his company's greatest invention was seized. A few Team Rocket grunts stood guard by the door, their black uniforms emblazoned with a red R. The scene was eerily quiet save for the distant cries of Pokémon being rounded up by rockets in the labs below. Giovanni offered the president a polite, cold smile and promised that Sylph's technology would be put to good use under his guidance. The president hung his head, knowing what that meant. As Giovanni turned to leave, Red, the young trainer who in another world would have been Kanto's hero, burst into the boardroom, gasping from battle. His Charizard and Pikachu bore scars from fighting through a gauntlet of grunts. Red's eyes widened at the sight of Giovanni holding the Master Ball. He had come so far, but he was too late. Giovanni chuckled, a deep sound that echoed in the hollow room. With a nod, one of his lieutenants released a cloud of sleep powder. Red staggered as the spores took hold. Reaching out in desperation, he watched helplessly, while Giovanni and his entourage vanished in a flash of smoke, the Master Ball firmly in their possession. And so, on that fateful day, the course of Kanto's history swerved into darkness. The Master Ball had fallen into the wrong hands. Giovanni's victory at Sylph Co set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the world of Pokémon. As the sun dipped low over Saffron City, Team Rocket banners were unfurled atop the Sylph Co tower, fluttering scarlet in the evening breeze. Below, citizens and Pokémon alike felt a chill of uncertainty. A long night was about to begin. With the Master Ball as his trump card, Giovanni moved swiftly to tighten Team Rocket's grip on the Kanto region. The change didn't happen with chaotic riots or loud announcements, but like a creeping shadow. Giovanni was cunning. He presented himself not as a conqueror, but as a savior restoring order to a chaotic world. Yet behind that facade, city by city, his forces methodically took control. Deep beneath Cerulean City, in a hidden cave, Giovanni sought out a secret weapon long rumored to exist. With the Master Ball in hand, he descended into the darkness where the legendary Mewtwo, a powerful psychic Pokémon born from forbidden experiments, lurked. The cavern trembled as Mewtwo sensed an intruder. Rocks levitated and shattered, and a distant roar of psychic rage reverberated through the grotto. Giovanni did not flinch. Stepping forward with calm resolve, he hurled the Master Ball. In a flash of blinding light, the orb struck true. The mighty Mewtwo was drawn inside, and with a single muffled click, the battle was over before it began. Giovanni emerged from that cave at dawn holding the Master Ball triumphantly. Inside, the furious Mewtwo was contained, its will bound by technology. For the first time in centuries, a human controlled a power equal to the gods. Armed with Mewtwo's might, Giovanni turned to the symbols of strength and leadership in Kanto, the gym leaders and the Pokémon League. He struck swiftly and without warning. In Vermilion City, Lieutenant Surge, a war veteran and electric-type gym leader, marshaled his Pokémon and townsfolk to defend their port. Thunderbolts from Surge's Raichu split the night sky, briefly holding back rocket squads. But then, Mewtwo stepped into the fray. With a single psychic wave, Surge's entire brigade of Pokémon was lifted off the ground, frozen helplessly in midair. Their electric attacks fizzled out. By sunrise, a crimson rocket flag flew over Vermilion Gym, and Lieutenant Surge knelt before Giovanni, forced to swear fealty to protect his people from further harm. Across the region, similar scenes played out. Pewter City and Cerulean City capitulated soon after Vermilion's fall, their leaders unwilling to see their homes reduced to rubble. In Celadon City, Grass-type leader Erica found her gym surrounded by rocket forces. To spare her citizens and her beloved Pokémon, she handed over control of the city, tears in her eyes as the rockets raised their flag above Celadon's grand department store. In Fuchsia City, the ninja leader Koga pragmatically aligned with Team Rocket early, accepting a high rank in Giovanni's regime in exchange for a measure of safety for his town. Over in Saffron City, the psychic gym leader Sabrina, ever enigmatic, stood aside as Giovanni's forces solidified their hold, even lending her telepathic abilities to help root out those who resisted. Meanwhile, Misty quietly fled Cerulean with her closest allies and Pokémon, disappearing into the tides rather than bow to the new order. High atop the Indigo Plateau, the Elite Four and Champion made their final stand. The Dragon Master Lance led the defense with his roaring Dragonite, joined by Lorelei's ice-cold precision, Bruno's fighting fury, and Agatha's ghostly tricks. For a brief moment, hope flickered that the League's combined might could repel Giovanni's coup. But hope was no match for Mewtwo. In a matter of minutes, the mighty Elite Four were defeated one by one. Lance's Dragonite, outmatched by Mewtwo's psychic onslaught, crashed to the ground in a heap. Lorelei's freezing attacks were reflected back until her Lapras fell. Bruno's powerhouse fighters were tossed aside as if weightless. Agatha's ghosts were dispelled by a single glowing stare from Mewtwo. With their defeat, organized resistance in Kanto crumbled. City by city, the dominoes fell. Vermilion City's brave stand had flickered out, and now any remaining defiance was swiftly snuffed. By the time Team Rocket turned its ambition westward to Johto, Kanto was firmly under Giovanni's boot. Johto's own gym leaders and elite trainers fought back valiantly. Claire and her dragons held Blackthorn's mountain pass for a time. Jasmine fortified Olivine's lighthouse, and even Champion Lance took to the skies on his Dragonite to defend his homeland. But Giovanni's forces, bolstered by cloned war Pokémon and the unstoppable Mewtwo, were overwhelming. One by one, Johto's proud cities fell. Goldenrod's radio tower was seized and soon blared rocket propaganda day and night. Equitech City's sacred tin tower was occupied and sealed off. Even Blackthorn City eventually yielded when its dragons grew too weary to continue. Within a year, both regions were firmly in Giovanni's iron grip. Team Rocket had remade itself from a shadowy gang into the ruling power of two regions. The Pokémon League was dissolved, its champions were defeated, in hiding or forced into compliance. Giovanni installed himself as supreme leader over Kanto and Johto, governing from the Indigo Plateau, which he refashioned into a private citadel. Always at his right hand was Mewtwo, pacified by a metal collar around its neck, a living weapon that ensured no one dared rise against him. The world slipped into a dark new era, where the dreams of wandering trainers and fair Pokémon battles were replaced by the grim reality of life under Team Rocket's reign. A heavy stillness settled over Kanto and Johto in the months after Team Rocket's victory. In city squares and town markets, the once cheerful chatter of Pokémon trainers gave way to an uneasy quiet. Team Rocket patrols became a common sight, stern-faced grunts marching two by two down the streets of Celadon, Violet, Goldenrod, and every town between. They carried Pokeballs on their belts and suspicion in their eyes. The bright neon signs of Pokemarts dimmed, now displaying portraits of Giovanni alongside strict proclamations, "Obey the rocket administration for a safe and prosperous region." Propaganda messages crackled on giant public screens, calm-voiced announcers praising the peace and unity Team Rocket had brought. Many watched these broadcasts with hollow eyes, remembering the freedom of yesterday. Some repeated the slogans out of fear or habit, others merely endured, clinging quietly to hope. Schools were not spared Giovanni's influence. In a small classroom in Pallet Town, children sat listlessly as a new history lesson was read aloud. The textbook in the teacher's hands had been rewritten by Rocket officials. It claimed Team Rocket had saved Kanto from chaos brought by irresponsible trainers. The teacher's voice wavered. She remembered the truth, but dared not correct the lies. Near the window, a 10-year-old boy named Ash Ketchum stared out at the cloudy sky. His textbook lay open to a page showing Giovanni posed heroically with a Charizard. Ash's fist clenched under his desk. He knew this wasn't the real story. His mother had whispered tales of a world before rocket rule, of gym leaders and champions who protected the innocent. But such tales were dangerous now, spoken only in secret. Ash's classmate beside him doodled tiny Pokémon figures in the margin of his notebook, then sighed and shut it, knowing the teacher would only erase such hopeful images. She noticed the restless looks on some of her students' faces and gave a gentle, sympathetic smile, silently urging patience and caution. In this new era, the cherished right of receiving a first Pokémon at age 10 had been abolished. Only children enrolled in Team Rocket's strict youth academies were allowed formal Pokémon training, and then only under the regime's watchful eyes. For most, childhood dreams of adventure would have to remain just dreams. For Pokémon themselves, daily life had changed in profound ways. Wild Pokémon that once wandered freely near towns grew wary and scarce. The woods around Pewter City and the tall grass of Route 3 were eerily quiet. Flocks of Pidgey and Spearow no longer ventured near human settlements, having learned to avoid the black uniformed patrols that scoured the routes. Citizens who owned Pokémon kept them indoors if they could. Beloved companions like Growlithe or Eevee were hidden in basements or secret cupboards whenever rocket inspectors came through. Under the new laws, unauthorized Pokémon training was illegal, and Rockets confiscated excess Pokémon from anyone deemed untrustworthy. Many families woke in the night to frantic knocks from a neighbor, begging for help to hide a Pikachu or Vulpix before the Rockets came. The prestigious gyms of Kanto and Johto, once hubs of community pride, were mostly dark and empty. Some had been repurposed as rocket barracks or training grounds for their recruits. The Cerulean Gym's grand pool lay still and drained, its glass ceiling collecting dust. A rocket emblem hung where the Cascade Badge symbol once was. Misty, its water-type gym leader, was long gone, her whereabouts unknown. In Pewter City, Brock's rock-themed gym was officially closed to the public. Unofficially, rumor said, its stone halls had become a storage depot for rocket weapons and supplies. Pokémon centers, those once welcoming red-roofed havens for injured Pokémon, now operated under watch. Nurse Joy still stood behind the counter with her practiced smile, but a Team Rocket officer lurked by the door, scrutinizing everyone who entered. Trainers needed a special permit, usually only given to Rocket affiliates, to get full service. Still, compassion quietly persisted. Now and then, a Nurse Joy would treat an unregistered Pokémon late at night, asking no questions, or slip extra medicine into a worried parent's hands for a sick Pokémon at home. But such kindness was done in silence and shadows, for fear of punishment. Professor Oak, the wise researcher of Pallet Town, found his life's work heavily shackled. His once bustling laboratory became eerily quiet after Team Rocket posted an agent at his door. Oak continued his research on Pokémon behavior and habitats, but every report he made was vetted by rocket scientists. The large habitat behind his lab, where hundreds of Pokémon once roamed freely under his care, was taken over by rocket technicians who tagged and cataloged each creature. Oak spent his days outwardly compliant, sharing only harmless findings, while privately keeping secret notes on Rocket's activities. Late at night, by a dim lamp, he wrote in a coded journal about anomalies he observed, the subtle sadness in Pokémon separated from their trainers, or the way certain rocket-modified Pokémon behaved strangely. He hid that journal under a floorboard, hoping it might one day help undo the damage being done. In markets and farms, life continued in a nervous imitation of normalcy. People did their work and shared small kindnesses, but always under Rocket's watchful eye. Farmers still plowed their fields with the help of sturdy Tauros and plump Miltank, but a portion of every harvest was claimed for the regime. Shopkeepers kept their doors open and lights on, greeting customers with forced cheer even as rocket guards stood at the corner. Conversations in public stuck to safe topics: the weather, the price of grain, a neighbor's new baby. Only in the privacy of back rooms or whispered under the cover of darkness would someone dare recall the old days. Remember when the Pokémon League came to town? And even then, such talk was brief and hushed. Any hint of criticism or hope for change was met with panicked glances. Walls had ears now, and a careless word could mean a harsh interrogation by rocket police. For aspiring Pokémon trainers, the world they dreamed of had been turned upside down. No longer could youngsters embark on a grand journey at 10 years old to collect badges and see the world. Instead, training Pokémon required a license from Team Rocket's authorities, granted only to those who pledged absolute loyalty. Giovanni's regime created a special Rocket Youth Academy. Select children of proven loyalty were enrolled to learn battling under Rocket supervision. These schools emphasized discipline and obedience over the joy of friendship with Pokémon. Many children refused to join and thus had to give up their hopes of becoming trainers. Yet even under the strict rule, the spirit of true training lived on. In secret hideaways, caves, forest clearings, and quiet backrooms, experienced elders quietly mentored the young and hopeful, keeping the old ways alive in defiance of Rocket law. Everyday life under Rocket rule was a study in contrasts. On the surface, there was order. The trains ran on time, the streets were clean, and crime by anyone outside Team Rocket virtually disappeared. But it was an oppressive order, built on fear. Families put their children to bed at night with gentle lullabies and whispered prayers that someday, somehow, this darkness would lift. In those quiet nights, under the same stars that once guided traveling trainers on their journeys, people clung to small sparks of hope. They remembered the old saying that had comforted trainers around campfires in years past: where there is friendship and love between people and Pokémon, there is hope. Under Team Rocket's iron rule, that hope lived on like a secret ember, hidden but not extinguished, waiting for a breath of wind to fan it into flame. Dark as times were, hope found ways to sprout in the cracks of despair. Scattered across Kanto and Johto, those who refused to submit began to seek one another out. At first, it was in ones and twos. A former gym leader quietly helping townsfolk here, an ex-officer of the Pokémon Rangers sheltering a fugitive there. These were the seeds of rebellion, small and fragile. But with each month under Giovanni's regime, those seeds took root and grew a bit stronger. One late night in Pallet Town, Professor Oak had a secret visitor. His grandson Blue slipped into the darkened lab, his usually confident face drawn and serious. By the light of a single desk lamp, Blue described what he had seen during months traveling in secret: cities locked down under curfew, Pokémon being abused or stolen by rocket squads, and whispers, precious whispers, of resistance. In his travels, Blue had connected with a few kindred spirits: the Steel-type gym leader Jasmine in Johto, who was tending to refugees and hiding injured Pokémon in her lighthouse, and Morty of Ecruteak, who offered sanctuary in the burned tower for those fleeing rocket persecution. Blue's voice shook with anger as he recounted how he witnessed rocket grunts tormenting a wild ampharos that once powered Olavine's lighthouse. Oak listened quietly, pride and worry mingling in his eyes. When Blue finished, Professor Oak simply nodded. They both understood. It was time to bring the scattered resistance together. Late one night in the depths of Viridian Forest, the core leaders of the resistance gathered in secret. A small campfire cast dancing shadows on the trees as familiar figures stepped into its glow. Red was there, silent and determined, having come out of hiding after many months. Beside him stood Blue, and around them assembled their friends and allies from across the region. Misty from Cerulean, Brock from Pewter, Erica from Celadon, and Leaf, the young trainer from Pallet Town who had started her journey at the same time as Red and Blue. They greeted each other with subdued smiles and embraces. They had all changed since their carefree days of traveling and training, but the spark of friendship remained. Professor Oak, escorted to the meeting by Blue, put a hand on Red's shoulder. Red managed to whisper an apology for not stopping Giovanni when he had the chance. Erica gently shook her head. "None of us could have stopped him alone," she said softly. Brock nodded in agreement. United by loss and determination, they all understood that only together could they hope to take back their world. By the light of that moonlit fire, they shared what resources and information they had. Misty quietly explained how she and a few others had been hiding families along the coast, moving them away from rocket-controlled cities. Erica described internal weaknesses she'd observed in Team Rocket's governance of Celadon. Rocket grunts there were growing complacent and arrogant, which could be exploited. Blue relayed that Jasmine and other Johto leaders were ready to rise when the moment was right, and Professor Oak shared a crucial insight. Giovanni was using a special device to control Mewtwo's mind from afar. If that psychic tether could be severed, Mewtwo might no longer fight for Team Rocket. Before the group dispersed, they made a pact. No more would they fight alone or in scattered pockets. They would coordinate, communicate, and strike as one when the time came. Blue cracked a hint of his old grin and nudged Red. "Just like old times, huh? Only this time don't hog all the glory." Red managed a small smile. Leaf reached out and squeezed both their hands. In that gentle moment, under the ancient trees of Viridian Forest, the resistance truly united. They doused the campfire and departed in different directions, each vanishing into the woods like ghosts, but now with a shared purpose lighting their way. In the weeks that followed, the rebel leaders worked in secrecy to fan their spark of hope into a flame. Messages were passed through unlikely couriers, shopkeepers, travelers, even carrier Pidgey, linking pockets of resistance across the regions. Coded phrases on public notice boards and subtle symbols etched on walls guided rebels to safe houses. A hidden network took shape, knitting together gym trainers, sympathetic nurses, shop clerks, and even a few disillusioned Rocket members. As small acts of defiance spread, graffiti declaring "Pokémon Forever Free" appearing on alley walls, or captive Pokémon mysteriously released from rocket compounds at midnight, courage inched back into ordinary people's hearts. Giovanni publicly scoffed at these incidents as trivial mischief, but behind closed doors he grew uneasy. He tightened security, doubling rocket patrols and urging his lieutenants to sniff out any whisper of dissent. Unbeknownst to him, even a few within Team Rocket's own ranks quietly cheered the rebels on, their hearts no longer in the cause. The stage was set. All that remained was a spark to ignite the uprising. Despite their unity, the rebels faced setbacks on the road to freedom. A midnight attempt to seize Goldenrod City's radio tower and broadcast a call to arms was foiled at the last moment. Its leader, Morty, was captured after holding off rocket forces to allow his comrades to escape. The rebels' message of hope crackled over the airwaves only briefly before being silenced. But in that short time, many citizens across Johto and Kanto heard the defiant call and felt heartened. Another daring raid on a secret rocket laboratory in Cinnabar Island succeeded in destroying the facility and even freeing several legendary Pokémon from captivity. But the victory came at a steep cost. The team suffered painful losses and injuries, and Mewtwo itself appeared during the chaos, nearly crushing the rebels before a massive explosion disrupted its control collar and allowed the attackers to retreat. These failures tested the Resistance's resolve. Yet, with each attempt, the rebels learned more about Team Rocket's strengths and weaknesses. They saw that Giovanni's armor was not impenetrable. The public would respond to a message of hope if given the chance, and even Giovanni's ultimate weapon could waver in its loyalty when its chains were rattled. Steeled by these hard lessons, the rebellion prepared for one final strike. It would be all or nothing. At last, the dawn of reckoning arrived. Exactly 1 year after his rise to power, Giovanni organized a grand ceremony at the Indigo Plateau to commemorate Team Rocket's unification of the regions. It was to be a showcase of Rocket's might. Rows of uniformed grunts stood at attention in the courtyard. A captive audience of local citizens and officials was bussed in and forced to attend. And high above on the League's balcony, Giovanni himself prepared to speak, Mewtwo hovering at his side like a silent sentinel. Unbeknownst to Giovanni, the rebels had chosen this moment to strike. At Giovanni's first words, Professor Oak would trigger his secret jamming device to disrupt Team Rocket's communications and, hopefully, Mewtwo's control. That would be the cue for the rebels to strike from all sides, Red, Blue, and Leaf swooping down from the high perimeter walls, allies hidden among the crowd rising up from within, and other brave souls creating diversions at the main gates outside. Each person and Pokémon had their role to play. Morning broke gray and tense over the Indigo Plateau. Giovanni stepped forward on the balcony, looking out over the assembled crowd with a triumphant smile. Flanked by a pair of Rocket executives and the imposing figure of Mewtwo, he began his speech. People of Kanto and Johto, 1 year ago I promised you peace and prosperity. He never finished the sentence. At that very moment, Professor Oak, standing inconspicuously among the invited dignitaries below, pressed a button on a small device hidden in his coat pocket. A shrill burst of feedback screeched through the loudspeakers, causing everyone to wince. Mewtwo's eyes flashed in discomfort as the psychic waves binding it faltered. Giovanni's words choked off in surprise. That was the signal. High above, Red sprang onto his Charizard's back. "Now!" he hissed. With a mighty flap of its wings, Charizard launched from its hiding spot and dived toward the balcony, flames licking at the corners of its mouth. Simultaneously, Blue's Blastoise emerged from behind a crenellation and fired twin jets of water at the rocket guards in the towers, knocking them out before they could raise the alarm. Leaf's Venusaur erupted from a thicket on a nearby ledge, its vines whipping out to entangle a cluster of rocket artillery on the roof. Down below, Misty's Gyarados erupted from the courtyard fountain in a fearsome display, even as Brock's Onix burst from the ground nearby. The combined onslaught of water and stone threw the rocket ranks into disarray, sending grunts scrambling. Panicked shouts echoed as the captive civilians in the crowd scattered for cover. But many of those civilians were rebels in disguise. In unison, they threw off coats and cloaks to reveal Pokeballs and determined faces. A surge of liberators from all walks of life, off-duty nurse joys, former gym trainers, ordinary folks fed up with fear, rushed the bewildered rocket grunts. On the balcony, Giovanni stumbled back, eyes wide at the sudden chaos. "What is the meaning of this? Stop them!" he bellowed. At his command, several rocket Pokémon sprang forward, Raiden, Nidoqueen, and Houndoom among them. Giovanni pointed at the airborne attackers. "Mewtwo, restrain them!" he ordered. expecting instant obedience. But Mewtwo hesitated. The psychic control collar around its neck sputtered with static, affected by Oak's jammer still humming in the air. For the first time, defiance flickered in Mewtwo's eyes. Seizing the moment, Red and Charizard streaked toward the balcony railing. Charizard unleashed a stream of flame that cut through the smoke of battle, forcing Giovanni's Pokémon to recoil. Blue's Blastoise landed heavy on the balcony tiles, with an earth-shaking thud, cannons smoking from suppressive fire. In the courtyard below, cheers began to rise over the sounds of combat as the rocket formation broke apart. Giovanni grit his teeth. So be it. If Mewtwo would not act on command, he would fight himself. From beneath his cloak, he produced a master ball, the very same stolen from Sylph, and threw it. In a flash of white light, Giovanni's personal Rhyperior materialized, bellowing and pawing at the ground. "Crush them!" Giovanni snarled. The hulking Rhyperior charged, shaking the whole balcony as it barreled toward Red and Blue. Before it could reach them, a blur of purple light intercepted the rampaging Pokémon. Mewtwo itself had moved, not to attack the rebels, but to stop Rhyperior. With a mere glance, Mewtwo telekinetically halted Rhyperior in its tracks, lifting the massive creature inches off the ground. Rhyperior roared and thrashed helplessly, legs churning in empty air. Giovanni stared in disbelief and rage. "Mewtwo, obey me!" he screamed, fumbling at the remote control on his belt, meant to direct the psychic collar. But sparks were dancing around Mewtwo's neck. Oak's interference and the strain of battle had weakened the device's hold. Down in the courtyard, the tide had definitively turned. Rocket grunts were throwing down their weapons and fleeing, or else being pinned by jubilant rebels and their Pokémon. Misty's Gyarados, scarred from past battles, let loose a victorious roar as it subdued the last rocket flamethrower truck by coiling its tail around it. Brock's Onix formed a protective wall at the main gate, preventing a contingent of rocket reinforcements from outside from breaking in. A few remaining rocket diehards tried to regroup around the stage beneath the balcony, only to find themselves surrounded by an intimidating trio. Lance's Dragonite swooped in from the sky. The Dragon Master had come out of hiding to join the fray. Claire's Kingdra blasted them with a warning stream of water, and Erica's Vileplume stood poised to release a sleep-inducing pollen cloud. The rocket grunts, seeing the legendary Dragon-type champion back with his Dragonite roaring overhead, promptly dropped to their knees in surrender. On the balcony, Giovanni found himself alone and cornered. Rhyperior had been telekinetically slammed against a wall by Mewtwo and lay fainted in a heap of cracked stone. Blue's Blastoise and Red's Charizard now flanked the rocket boss, their stances tense and ready to strike. Leaf climbed up over the railing with her Venusaur's help, joining her friends with determined eyes. Giovanni backed up to the balcony's edge, cold fury etched on his face. His grand plans were unraveling in minutes, yet the man refused to go quietly. With shaking hands, he reached under his jacket and drew a sleek black pistol, an ugly, desperate tool rarely seen in Pokémon battles. He leveled it at Red, the youth who had been his bane from the start. Before Giovanni could fire a shot, a bolt of lightning crackled across the balcony. Pikachu, Ash's Pikachu, struck like a yellow thunderbolt, knocking the gun from Giovanni's hand with a precise thunderbolt. In the heat of battle, Ash had clambered up the vine ropes Leaf's Venusaur left hanging and arrived just in time. The firearm clattered away, useless. Giovanni stared in shock as Ash Ketchum, small and defiant, stepped protectively in front of Red. Pikachu landed beside its trainer, cheeks still sparking, and fixed Giovanni with a fierce glare. It was over. All around the courtyard and balcony, the fight had ceased. Team Rocket's forces were either subdued or in full retreat. Giovanni, singed and disarmed, slowly sank to his knees. The sounds of battle gave way to the crackle of a few lingering fires and the labored breathing of exhausted Pokémon. For a tense heartbeat, no one moved. Mewtwo hovered in the air a few feet from Giovanni, watching its former master with an unreadable expression. Giovanni looked up at the creature he had enslaved, perhaps wondering if it would now turn its considerable power on him. Mewtwo's eyes glowed blue. Giovanni flinched, but the psychic Pokémon merely snapped the metal collar from its neck and let it fall clanging at Giovanni's feet. In that act, Mewtwo symbolically severed the last tie between them. Without a word, the legendary Pokémon turned and floated toward Red and the others. The rebels tensed for a moment, but Mewtwo simply inclined its head slowly, a gesture of acknowledgement or gratitude. It was hard to tell. Then, with one powerful sweep of its tail, Mewtwo shot upward into the open sky, disappearing into the cloud break, free at last. A great cheer rose from the courtyard below as the assembled rebels and liberated citizens realized what had happened. Giovanni's regime had been toppled. Blue let out a whoop of triumph, throwing an arm around Red's shoulders. Misty laughed through tears as she recalled her Gyarados and rushed toward the balcony stairs to join her friends. Professor Oak, who had stood steady through the fight, closed his eyes and whispered a thank you to the heavens. Jesse and James, who moments ago had quietly helped round up fleeing rockets, looked at each other in joyous disbelief. Meowth, perched on James's shoulder, let out an exhilarated meow that echoed across the plateau. Giovanni remained kneeling, his head bowed as Jesse and James approached him cautiously. From her pocket, Jesse produced a pair of iron restraints. With swift efficiency, the two former rockets bound Giovanni's hands behind his back. He did not resist. The infamous leader of Team Rocket had no fight left in him. Surrounded by the very people he had sought to rule, Giovanni closed his eyes, silent and defeated. In the hours and days that followed, a new dawn broke over Kanto and Johto. The aftermath of the battle was filled with both joy and solemnity. As sunlight crept over the plateau, volunteers moved through the courtyard, giving aid where it was needed. Medics, led by several Nurse Joys who had hurried there upon hearing of Team Rocket's fall, set up stations to treat the injured. Rebel fighters and former Rocket grunts lay side by side on makeshift cots, their Pokémon resting or helping fetch supplies, as a gentle spirit of cooperation spread. Pokémon that had been forced to serve Team Rocket were carefully freed from control devices and reunited with their original trainers, or else released to the wild, where they bounded away with cheerful cries. Later that day, Giovanni was escorted away under heavy guard. An officer, Jenny, one of the few who had quietly kept her oath to uphold justice throughout the Rocket regime, took custody of him, ensuring he would face trial for his crimes. As Giovanni was driven off in a secure vehicle, he cast one last look back at the Indigo Plateau, at the tattered rocket banners being torn down and a rainbow of liberated Pokémon flying across the sky. His era was over. News of Team Rocket's defeat spread like spring sunlight across both regions. Spontaneous celebrations broke out in city after city. In Saffron City, citizens carefully removed the giant rocket posters and billboards in the square and replaced them with old town flags and flowers. In Celadon, people gathered in the park, replanting a tree that had been cut down for a rocket checkpoint. Cities across the regions held humble celebrations of freedom. In towns big and small, neighbors came together in the streets to remember those lost and to begin healing together. Former Team Rocket members who laid down their arms were given a chance to atone and even joined in rebuilding what had been broken. There was a place for everyone willing to work toward a better future. A week after the battle, Pallet Town hosted a simple, heartfelt gathering. Under the golden light of early evening, friends and families assembled on the gentle hill by Professor Oak's laboratory, beneath the great oak tree that had stood there for generations. Professor Oak lit a small bonfire as the sun set, and around its warm glow the heroes of this long struggle sat together with their community. Oak spoke with quiet reverence, telling the story of the dark year they had endured as if it were already a legend of old. He spoke of bravery and sacrifice, of small kindnesses in bleak times, and of the courage it took to stand up to tyranny. The townsfolk listened in respectful silence, children leaning against their parents as they heard how a few good people and Pokémon had refused to give up hope. Oak's words drifted into the night sky with the embers, ensuring that the memory of what had been and what had been won would never be forgotten. Morning brought a fragile peace. Professor Oak reopened his lab to new beginnings. Once again, 3 starter Pokémon, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle, were ready to meet their new trainers. The tradition of Pokémon journeys, thought lost, began anew. On a bright morning in Pallet Town, Ash Ketchum embraced his mother, and at long last set out with Pikachu on the Pokémon journey he had always dreamed of. He joined a handful of other youngsters on the road, their laughter echoing as they ventured toward the horizon, Pokeballs at their belts and boundless hope in their hearts. Red and Blue watched from a hilltop as the new trainers departed, hopeful that the next generation would keep the flame of courage alive. Blue cracked a rare grin, joking that one young boy with a Pikachu might even give them a run for their money someday. Red chuckled softly, feeling nothing but pride at that idea. Thus, the long night ended. Scars remained, but the bond between humans and Pokémon emerged unbroken, perhaps even stronger. The regions would heal and carry the memory of this darkness as a reminder that even if shadows rise again, there will always be heroes ready to stand against them. Under the gentle light of a new dawn, humans and Pokémon alike could finally rest. The nightmare was over, and hope shone brightly on the horizon.